Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're at. Welcome back. This is the Cutlass Podcast. I am Paul Kingsbury, your host, author of the Chief Petty Officer's Guide, the Petty Officer's Guide, and a co-author on the next edition of the Blue Jackets Manual. Welcome back. Hopefully, we continue to produce some content that you find insightful, useful, and let's take some time today to keep that leadership cutlass sharp. So first, before we dive into that, on the Navy side, I just want to say congrats and give a shout out to all the new Navy Senior Chiefs and Master Chief Petty Officers. Those results came out several weeks ago. So great new milestone, great opportunity for new leadership positions. If you are a new Senior Chief or Master Chief who's listening, you might want to check out the podcast episode I did with Samira on growing into a new position. As much as you think those skills as a new chief or what you learned as a chief petty officer, you'll use those and continue to build on those, but you're going to have to use new things, gain new knowledge, and you're going to lead in a new way as a senior chief and a master chief. So you might want to check that out. Cutlass Podcast is at over 50 episodes now, so there's a lot of content. It's not just leadership, it's management topics. I often have guests that can give you their stories and their lessons learned. So there's a lot to check out. So I encourage you to subscribe on your podcast channel of choice. Check that out and then reach out, give me some feedback. What kind of content would you like to hear? What would you find useful? Remember, the goal of this is to build on the content in the books that I either author or co-author. Writing can only go so far. And I found that these conversations through the Cutlass Podcast really help to dive into the topics and add a personal touch and personal experiences to them. I was recently a guest on the Lead Up podcast with David Deary out there at the Enlisted Leadership Foundation. So if you haven't had a chance to check that one out, you might want to check that out. That was an interview with him. And I really enjoyed that opportunity to have that discussion and catch up with Dave. So he's doing some great work out there in San Diego with the Enlisted Leader Foundation. So thanks again for that invite. So I just mentioned congratulations, on the career progression of new senior chiefs and master chiefs. And that's great. But I think we have to also take time to focus on when things don't go so well. So I think today's episode is going to get in this topic of what would formerly be called career derailment. So that's kind of those opportunities, or they're not opportunities because you don't look for them. But these are those situations where you find that you may be demoted, fired, or find yourself stuck in a current position and you're unable to continue progressing on your desired career path. And this can happen to all of us. We're all at risk for it, whether we think, in many cases, the decisions we make can be made deliberately. We know we're doing bad things that could risk our careers. But in many cases, maybe we're just not aware that we're progressing down that path and then things can happen. But I think it's more important to learn that even though you go through a situation that can lead to career derailment, you can learn, you can overcome, and you can get that career back on track. So a few weeks ago, I was scrolling through LinkedIn and I came across an article that was called "Don't Give Up the Ship, Leading After Being Crushed." It was published back in May 31st, so not too long ago. It was written by Nick Bowlin. He's a Navy Chief Petty Officer, Fire Controlman, and I just read it and I thought it was great. It resonated with the nuke power side of me. He really was very transparent and upfront, and he shares his lessons learned after a career derailment episode he recently had. So I immediately reached out to him on LinkedIn, messaged him and said, hey, I think this would be a great podcast episode. And he graciously agreed to join me. So with me today to dive into this topic and cover his story is Nick Bowlin. Nick, welcome to the Cutlass Podcast. How are things going?
Hi, Paul. Great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
All right. So tell us a little bit about yourself first before we get into it.
Yeah, so been in the Navy for 18 years, currently stationed at ComNav Surfland as a readiness event assessor, and currently live out here in Chesapeake, Virginia with my wife, Melissa, of 10 years, and my 7-year-old daughter, Adeline.
Awesome. And you said you've been in about 18 years now?
Yes.
Okay. And then you're currently serving on the Surfland staff as an assessor, correct?
Yeah, I'm over there at M44 over at CEP 86 on NOB in Norfolk.
Awesome. So this was, again, your article, I think it was brave. I think it was great. I think it showed great humility. And that's one thing we talk about is, we expect that attribute out of Navy chiefs. I think far too often we see the opposite behavior, this protectionist behavior. When we screw up, we try to hide. but there's so much to learn from your situation. And I'm so glad you wrote about it. So let's start there. What prompted you to write this article?
So, Paul, I've always been a huge fan of professional development and sharing these types of stories. And I'm actually currently enrolled in an online MBA program at William and Mary here in Williamsburg. And I'm currently in a marketing strategy class. And there was an assignment a couple weeks ago called Personal Online Presence. And that particular assignment really was about personal branding, how to, develop a quality personal brand promise, clean up your LinkedIn profile a little bit, optimize it, and garner interest in your brand. And one of the assignments was to create content. And one of the ways that was suggested was to publish a LinkedIn article about a professional topic. And one of the topics, that I've always been very passionate about is leadership. And, I've looked at a lot of assignments, in my undergrad and my graduate program as, okay, well, I just got to get through this. I got to punch the ticket, to move on to the next class. I only got so much time, before I got to move to the next duty station. I got to get this done. But, this time it felt a little different. And, I thought to myself, I'm going to do this. I wanted to make an impact. And, I wanted to write about something that people would actually benefit from, that would captivate their attention. And I wanted it to be published in a forum that had a large reach. So, I immediately thought of the Chiefs Mess. I am a member of the LinkedIn CPO group, and I saw that there were thousands of members in that group. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to publish an article about a difficult situation. I'm going to, be a little vulnerable here and see what kind of response it gets.
Awesome. Yeah. And that's where I came across it too. So, so LinkedIn is an interesting platform. There are definitely tactics you have to learn. I've been on there a lot, but I know I could even get better. So, all right. So let's walk through the situation that led to what you describe as this crushing moment in your career. Go ahead and tee that up and you kind of just overview the situation you wrote about in your article.
So the article focuses on a time that I was actually removed from my position as leading chief petty officer while I was stationed on USS Gerald R. Ford. So I actually arrived on Ford back in 2014 when we were still in the pre-com environment. So when I got there, we hadn't even done crew move aboard yet. We were still building the crew. If you've ever been on a pre-com before, there's really two different types of the pre-com environment. You have the very beginning where it's all sunshine and rainbows. People are coming in, they're doing mainly administrative work, there's no duty, life is good. And as you move closer and closer to crew move aboard, you've got people that you've got to send TAD to get trained. They've got to get qualified. You've got to stand up duty sections. Instructions have to be finalized. And you have all those normal pre-com environment stressors, but, with Ford is a little bit different being first in class. We had almost completely brand new sailors, very little returnees from the fleet. So we had green sailors, we had a lot of people at that command too. There was during the pre-com environment, they manned the crew to 100%. Nobody gets transferred off of there until the ship is actually committed. So you commissioned. So you have a lot of excessive amounts of leadership there. We had a lot of new technology that we're trying to learn. I was in particular in charge with the oversight of the dual band radar, which was a first of a kind, one of a kind radar on that ship. So phased array radar, similar to what we have on Aegis cruisers and destroyers. So a lot of eyes on us from, a political standpoint. You had high level officials constantly that, coming to the ship, the pressure of the shipyard, to finish the ship on time and meet deadlines, and after the ship was commissioned, we had an unpredictable schedule. It was in and out, in and out. We came back in for a second yard period. We had independent steaming events, manning issues, after the commissioning. And during all of that, I was leading a division, with green people. I had little knowledge myself on these systems. We're learning it as we go. And, of course I had, the collateral duty load. I was the 3MA for combat systems. So I was an LCPO of a division that had, novel technology that we were all trying to wrap our brains around. I had one of the most manpower intensive collateral duties. And on top of that, I'm trying to stand watch, as in combat. I'm trying to get qualified as, TAO and ADWIC and all of those different watch stations, as well as running the CSAO organization at one point. It was tough. And on top of all of that, we were getting ready to do our combat systems qualifications, tests, and trials. So shooting weapons for the first time, a lot of really high level evolutions were, getting crammed into a very short timeline. And, I just, at that point, I just came to a point where I had to pick and choose, what events I could be at. So it required me to, take a step back, and it, from my day-to-day divisional duties. And I had to delegate a lot of things that I wouldn't normally delegate. And that resulted in a lack of engagement, lack of oversight, and just less face time on the deck plates with my sailors. And, throughout that whole process, the maintenance schedule, the actual underway schedule of the ship just was really wearing down my guys. Especially in a fire control division, it's maintenance can crush these guys. I mean, they are doing maintenance 24/7. They are, the mechanics of combat systems. And, we had morale issues. We had personality conflicts within the division. Overall, the climate just turned very toxic. And, without me being engaged to help mitigate that, I had some of my sailors voice concerns to my chain of command, and they had brought in some folks to do some focus groups, and found that there were some pretty severe climate issues in my division, and they were directly related to my failure as an LCPO to mitigate and correct those issues. So subsequently, I was removed from my position and reassigned to other duties.
Okay. So a lot going on there. We don't have time to dive into it. Because this is your piece of it, but whenever I've written about this, I've talked about this too. There's definitely some organizational factors that were contributing to line up to this as well. But let's talk about you and your initial emotional reaction. So how were you notified? How did you react to the situation, this challenge? And then why do you think you reacted that way initially?
Well, my first initial reaction was, I was definitely concerned. I was like, my chain of command was told me that they were going to bring some folks in and, find out what the issues were. And of course I was, very receptive to that, because I wanted, if there was an issue, I wanted to know what it was and I wanted to be corrected. And a couple days later, after, we had a few meetings with some of my sailors, and individually and in small groups, I was debriefed on what the issues were. And honestly, my first impression was I was just angry, because I was basically, all the facts were laid out. I was angry because, some of the things that they told me, I wasn't aware of, and that really bothered me. And, also it was, really hard, to hear that, I was failing when I felt like I was working my tail off. I was being pulled in a million directions. And, quite frankly, I saw a lot of people, a lot of my peers in the chief level, that weren't working nearly as hard as I was. But, it was kind of hard to hear, like when you feel like you're working really hard, that you're doing a terrible job. And, after that, kind of had an onset of being really sad, that, my sailors were in such a terrible place, and that they were living in a miserable environment. And I just realized, I'd failed at my most important charge of creating that, team environment in my division.
Okay. So did you have a division officer at the time too?
I did have a division officer, and he had a situation very similar to mine. He was double tapped as not just the the fire control officer for my division, but he was also the, tapped as the systems test officer because that billet was gapped. So, he also, was in a similar situation where he was probably not as engaged as he should have been either, because he was also getting pulled in a million different directions. And, we had a very, very, very difficult dynamic because we just didn't see each other a lot. He was off doing his thing, I was off doing my thing, and the division for, I would say, probably 80% of the day, they were kind of fending for themselves.
Copy. And yeah, you mentioned earlier, I have been on a pre-com. I was on Ronald Reagan and pre-commissioned on her. I was a Navy nuke, so less administrative time. I did do a lot of administrative work because I was running the reactor training department, but right away we're in the plants, kind of engaged. But it is a challenging environment, and there is a huge transition from happy shiny all the way to the sudden ramp up to get certified and get the ship turned over and things like that. So it is a tremendous workload. So all right. So as we go, and I want to make sure this just isn't from your perspective and what you learn. That is one perspective. But for the listeners, there's some points I'm going to make in here about leadership from the perspective, right? So Nick mentioned about feedback. I want to dive in there a little bit. As far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't have been blindsided like that, right? So if you were getting performance feedback and coaching along the way, so I see some breakdowns in communication and leadership from those above you and at the departmental level. So let's talk about your article. Your article went into, obviously you did some self-reflection. That's great. I talked about the importance of that. I think you probably went through some stages of grief, right? So the anger, I don't know if there was any denial or anything, but finally you got to this kind of acceptance. Okay, here it is, right, wrong, and different. And you offered 6 lessons learned that I'd like you to build on. So let's go on each of these one by one. So number one was accept feedback. So tell us about that one.
Yeah. So for me, I did go through a little bit of denial, just like you just mentioned, and because I just didn't want to hear that I had failed. Because quite frankly, I have never been fired. I had never been told that I had done a terrible job before. So that was something really hard to hear, and I was not prepared mentally to have that conversation. So, and that's the thing about accepting feedback. You have to be willing to receive that feedback. And if you know that you're a person that doesn't take well to critical feedback, you have to do some self-reflection, maybe do a little self-talk, because you're going to find yourself in that situation. And if you're not prepared for those hard conversations, you're just not going to receive it. And, the same thing goes for leadership. They need to be prepared to give that critical feedback. So it goes both ways. You have to be prepared and want to receive it. And your leadership has to be prepared to adequately communicate that to you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I saw this when I was on active duty. There'd be a lot of talk. People would recognize in certain people, and not just in the chief's mess, in the wardroom, it doesn't matter. Within the division, right? People would know those who were struggling. And I just saw this, I don't know if it was a common theme or propensity, but this kind of like just letting them hang. No one would engage them with coaching and feedback, and they just let them roll down this road to failure and then bam, come in with a hammer when it just always blew my mind. Instead of going, hey, we've got a person who obviously, as we've discussed before the podcast, at least in the Navy, you're in many cases, you don't have the manning you need. So every person on the team is important. They all are developing. They all require coaching and feedback. So I don't like this, and leaders need to reflect on this. Why wouldn't you engage and give the people your feedback that they need, right? Because I'm telling you, just to recover from that, and the emotional toll it took on you and your team, by the way, right? They saw their chief get fired and their division officer go through some stuff. That's a big deal. But I also think the feedback you mentioned that could have probably helped was, what would you do differently getting feedback from your team? Is there something that you would have gotten there that could have helped?
Yeah, feedback really is an iterative process. It's not like you're just saying like all encompassing at one particular moment in time. It has to be continuous. So encouraging that feedback can, by creating an environment that's positive is really key there, because if your folks don't feel comfortable, criticizing, your leadership decisions in a safe place, you're just not going to get that feedback. So it's important to be able to have that candor with your sailors, and really teach them how to craft effective feedback. A lot of times you might just get feedback, well, I don't like the way that we did this. I'm like, okay, well, we need to break this down a little bit. Why didn't it work? What could we have done better? Things of that nature.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, yeah, and even in Nuke Power, we were big on, this kind of post-event debriefs, right? Those are those opportunities to learn, or even at the end of the day, huddling with the team and just opening it up, creating that environment where you have the opportunity to go, hey, what did we do well today? What do we need to improve? What's coming up that I need to adjust? Again, I just don't know if I see that to the extent it could be. And I don't know why, but one other thing I want to touch on, you mentioned, is this problem of over delegation. The last Cutlass podcast was literally on the leadership style of delegation. It's really a management skill more than a leadership style. But one of the things I recommend is, one of the ways you can detect it is just in the behavior of your people and the feedback. So again, just something to consider. So we won't dig in that more, but there is a recent edition of that I think really complements that piece. All right, the second point you made was take extreme ownership, and you bring up Jocko's book. So let's dive into that a bit.
Yeah, so that was actually uh, part of my assignment when I was removed and assigned some remedial actions as far as correcting my leadership. I read the book, and I really took it in. I eventually, initially when I was given the book and I was told to read it, I was kind of like, okay, well, this is just something, again, I just got to get through. But I ate a big piece of humble pie, and really connected with some of the things that were in this book. And the idea of owning all of the problems, at first seems a little difficult because I haven't had very many leaders that I've worked for in the Navy that have taken extreme ownership. There's always a lot of finger pointing, and especially when I was on the forward in that pre-com environment, it was never my fault. It was always somebody else's. It was the shipyards. It was, another division's. It was another chief's fault. But the problem with that is, when there is a problem on your team and everybody abstains from owning that problem, it never gets solved. So you have these issues that just linger and they fester forever. And that's your job as a leader. Like, whether you want to or not, you own those problems. And, it's your job, to either solve them or put people in positions that can solve them. So, I think there was a moment that was pretty powerful, after I had been removed. I had gone to quarters probably a few days after I had been fired. And I had asked my chain of command, can I speak to my division? I'd like to address them. And I stood up in front of them, Paul, and I told them, I was like, I asked the question, there's a lot of issues going on in the division. LPOs in the first classes were fired. I was fired. We have all these problems. Whose fault is it? I just asked that question point blank. I had a couple of people like looking around, kind of staring at each other. There were a few people that said, well, Chief, I think that, it's all of our faults. And, you had some people, well, it's this guy's fault. And, I just stopped them, probably the second or third guy mid-sentence was like, it's none of your fault. Everything that happened is my fault. I own it. None of them blamed me. And that's where the blame is, and that's something you have to realize as a leader. Your people aren't going to necessarily point the finger at you, in a public forum, but they're going to say it amongst themselves, and they're going to think it. So, you've got to own those problems to even attempt to get on a path of redemption and rebuilding that trust that you lost.
And you said that admitting it is not enough. So this morning I was on, scrolling through my TikTok feed. So I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson. He comes out with some pretty good, things in psychology and things like that. So today his thing was like, on self-reflection. He's like, sit on the bed and ask yourself, what remarkably stupid things am I doing that will screw up my career and life? So asking that question is important. But the point he made then is like, and then are you willing to honestly answer them? And then what are you willing to do about the answer that you get? Right. So I think that's your point about admitting wrong is not enough. So once you admitted it, where did that take you?
So it really just brought me to the conclusion that, I need to seek that continuous feedback. And the feedback that I get has to be quality. I tried to, implement an environment where radical candor was the new norm, where people would, you know, it, challenge directly and care personally. And, you have to follow up. And, when somebody brings you a concern, that follow up is key, because if you don't follow up, um, they're going to know that you don't care. They're going to see right through it. So, admitting, like you're saying, admitting you're wrong is not enough. You have to seek that continuous feedback, and you have to follow up on that feedback. That's what's key there.
Absolutely. And I applaud you for taking your piece of it. But I think there was ownership above you. You were within their purview of ownership. So again, if you were getting the feedback from them, I think there's radical candor that you were owed early on. I think there was performance feedback you were owed early on. So I think your departmental leadership had some of this reflection to do as well. Because if one of my sailors fails, and I'm sure it was the same with you, I have to look at myself first and go, okay, what did I not do? Right? What did I not do in the development model and basically the situational leader, right? Did I educate? Did I do my role with positive discipline? Did I educate? Did I explain the standards? Did I engage with active and frequent communication? Did I follow up? Did I coach? Did they have the tools and resources they need? Did I make sure the workload wasn't too heavy for what the force was able to handle? And did I provide channels of feedback for them to communicate back to me and then back to the leadership? When I heard that, what am I willing to do? When I hear that hard truth of, hey, we just can't get all of it done, what are you willing to do to help that manage it on your team? So that's what I would offer to the leaders above you. All right, earn trust. That was your next thing. Talk about that one.
Yeah. So the thing about trust is, especially in situations like this, when you lose it, you can't just take it back. I mean, it's different when you walk into the room for the very first time, as like a leading chief petty officer or division officer or department head. You have it inherently, but when you lose it, the only way to get it back is the person that you lost it with or the group you lost it with. They have to give it back willingly to you, and the only way to do that is to show them that you care. I mean, that was a big tenet of my one of my previous CEOs, Captain JJ Cummings. He was really big about owning issues and showing your people that you care by deeds, not words. In the words of George Washington, you can say that you care all day long, but if you're not seeking that feedback and following up and correcting issues, they're not going to trust you. I mean, it actually, I don't know if you're a fan, Paul, of Ted Lasso, but there was an episode on Ted Lasso where he had like a suggestion box, and in the locker room, the showers were broken and they'd been broken forever, and somebody put a message in there like, "Hey, coach, the showers are broken." Well, he went in there and he fixed it. He didn't say anything to the team. They just came in one day and they're like, "Wow, the showers work." And that meant a lot more than saying like, "Hey guys, I'm going to get the showers fixed." He actually went in there, rolled up his sleeves, and he did the work. And that those are the ways that you earn back trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I love Ted Lasso, and I remember that episode. And again, right, sometimes it's not what you say, it's what you're willing to do that really earns the trust. And I like your point about radical candor. Again, I've made like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 stars right now next to things you've talked about that I've actually got podcast episodes on that complement the points you're making. So again, if you're listening, go back and listen to some of those. So all right, start with your why. I know I did a podcast episode on this one. So what do you have to offer with starting with your why?
When I ran into this situation, the first thing I thought was like, man, what did I do wrong, and how do I fix it? I wasn't really trying to get to the root of the problem, and after I sat down and took a little reflection, it's like, why am I here? Why do I care? I kind of rediscovered my motivation, for being, that LCPO. Like I'm here to, serve my sailors. They need me. We're all here to do amazing things. And once I had that, that why is your foundation, and if you don't have that, you're never going to get to an effective solution or mitigation to whatever issue you're facing. So I think that why really serves as a foundation for motivation to get through whatever you're facing.
All right, awesome. And then the last one, share your experiences. I think that's what we're doing now, but what else do you want to offer there?
I think that sharing is probably one of the most important things that we do not do in the Chiefs mess. There's a lot of shame, centered around these negative career derailments, as you put it, and it's hard to talk about it. But if we don't talk about it, people are gonna, that are in similar positions are gonna find themselves in the same place because they didn't know how to deal with this situation. Or, if you have gone through one of these crushing moments and you see somebody going down that path, you should help them, get back on that path of the righteous sailor, and it's not just enough to share your feedback. You have to be good, at telling that story, because if you're not effective and you don't, with connecting, on a personal, emotional level with who you're sharing your story with, they're not going to care. It's like, okay, I could have read that on a Reddit forum, but it means something, when you make that connection and they can actually feel, like I can tell you, like when I was, getting counseled by, my PA, my department head, and I received a counseling chit as a chief, like I had tears running down my eyes. Like that was a hard moment, and, if you're effective at, really communicating, not just the situation, but how it felt and how it made other people feel, that's how you can take that experience, sharing that experience to the next level, and it's going to be more impactful in others. So I think that that's an important piece to that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when did you make chief?
It was back in 2016.
Okay, so I mean, you've been in the mess a while. I had been in the mess in a while. So why do you think the Chiefs mess reacts that way? Why don't we share with each other? What is it? Is there a belief system in there that's counterproductive? I think you're familiar, right? We went through initiation, and there's this, if a chief stumbles, they don't fall. If they fall, they will get up. Kind of this, again, this belief system of a chief can't fail that I think is unrealistic and counterproductive to the things we're looking to, that really develop truth, or that really develop trust within the team and organizational learning. What do you think about that?
I think part of the problem is, when you do take a stumble like this, it's you might be able to recover, within your department, within your division, but you have kind of that black cloud that hangs over your head. Are people going to trust you later on? Am I going to get selected for that collateral duty that I put in for, because people know that I had some issues in the past. So I think it's maybe linked a little bit to self-preservation, and how they think they're able to progress after that happens. So I think that's really the stigma there. It's like, am I afraid to share it because I'm not going to be able to get a position, or I'm not going to get ranked as high in the next ranking? There's a lot of different things, but I think that social stigma is just the main reason.
Yeah, it's definitely tough. As a command master chief, I definitely had my times when I had to counsel chief petty officers, and I've seen them cry before, not just, not due to my like kind of approach, but just because of the, the personal embarrassment, I think, of um, all of these expectations of being a Navy chief. And I got it. The business we do is tough and it's hard, and we do a lot of high end stuff, and we operate systems that are dangerous. So I'm not saying that in some of the cases that's not warranted, but um, we are all human too, right? We're susceptible to this. And it goes back to, again, if we just had the LCPOs for the chiefs that realize, as a senior chief, now my real role is to shape, coach, and mentor my chief petty officers, right? And I often say, when you make senior chief or mass chief, you are taking steps away from the deck plate, right? I'm not saying you don't talk to your sailors anymore, but your real influence targets and the people you are grooming and developing are the chiefs under you and the senior chiefs under you. Or when you get in the command mass chief program, right now it's about grooming and developing LCPOs, the broader chiefs mess and the communication style you want there. Heck, you even get into developing and grooming commanding officers in the wardroom. And then when you get up on a flag staff, now you're grooming other command mass chiefs, right? So I just want to put that point out. We love that mantra of deck plate leader, but who you influence significantly changes, and who you owe performance feedback to changes as you move up too. So I'll throw that out there for senior chiefs and master chiefs to take and consider. And one, are you really coaching and developing those chiefs that work in your department or in your command the way you should? All right, so fast forward to today. We're years removed. How's your leadership approach different? I'm sure you've got some kind of methods in place now to kind of assess yourself and continue to grow and learn as a leader and manager. And then what would your advice be to those who may be in the same situation as you?
Moving forward, Paul, that continuous feedback that we talked about earlier is key, and that aggressive follow up. In some cases, you really have to, pull that feedback out of people. So, when you make mistakes, just be like a goldfish and just forget it and move forward. Don't let it keep you in that same place. And another thing is, intentionally take time, to visit your people. If you're a chief, go visit your division. If you're a senior chief, go talk to your chiefs. And it's not just a random thing. It has to be intentional. Take some time, every day. Like, okay, I'm gonna, if you're on a ship, I'm gonna go walk around, 20 minutes, after cleaning stations, or, right after, if you have like an afternoon meeting, I'm going to go talk to people after the meeting. I think lifelong learning is key, to make yourself a better leader. If you are eligible to go to the Senior Enlisted Academy, you should do it. We need to, and that's one thing that I've noticed. There's a lot of people that are not encouraging other fellow chiefs and senior chiefs to attend the SEA, and it's an amazing program. I attended during COVID, and it was a great experience. Seek secondary education, whether you have your undergrad or a graduate degree, that's only going to help you. And, be involved in your community. If you have the opportunity to go to a selection board, go. If you have the opportunity to go write a test, be part of the, that panel, do it. If you can participate in symposiums, do it. Those are the things that are really going to help you progress as a leader and a manager.
Absolutely. Yeah. All great points. And that point you made about building in time in your daily schedule to talk to people is huge. That is a piece of management, the management function. I know we talk leadership all the time, but you do manage your people too, right? You plan what they're doing, you plan their activities, you organize them, you direct them, and then you follow up. So part of the follow up is those discussions. And you know this too, when you're out there having those conversations with them on the work site, they get the opportunity to demonstrate what they're doing. They get to vent to you, right? So you get to relieve some of that pressure and frustration they may be having. And it's a sort of reward power when you can recognize them and the things they're doing and show that you've got their back to the extent you can. So I can't underestimate the power of just walking around and taking time each day. Like you said, maybe only 20 minutes, but first of all, talking to those key influence targets in your division or department, and then walking it out from there, including your division officer or your department head or your commanding officer, executive officer, Don't just think of leading down, think about leading up, and then also across. Who are the peers in the mess that you should be having conversations with and checking in from time to time? So, all right, Nick, I think that kind of is a great point to wrap it up on. So again, my guest today has been Nick Bowlin. He wrote an article on LinkedIn called "Don't Give Up the Ship: Leading After Being Crushed." If you get a chance and you're in that LinkedIn page, I'll share the link. I think I can share it on my episode description. And then obviously this content dives in a little more. Hey, Nick, thanks again for taking time to join me. Good luck to you.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me, Paul.
Absolutely. Okay, that'll wrap it up for another episode of the Cutlass Podcast. Again, I'm Paul Kingsbury. Always work hard to keep your leadership cutlass sharp, reflect and improve, and then take what you learn to become a steady, versatile, and credible leader who makes a positive difference in your personal and professional life.